what the cast of Friends can do, we can do more cheaply and more chaotically with our predecessor podcast, BREXITCAST. Get back together for a reunion episode.
We've only left it 5 years.
Have you watched it yet, though, Chris?
No.
Yeah, Laura's here, Chris is here, and back by popular demand, and I really mean it, Dr. Katya Adler in Brussels.
Hello, Katya. How are you?
Hello. It's very lovely to be with you all again.
Welcome to BREXITCAST.
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 From the BBC.
No one's got a clue what Brexit is.
Brexit is...
I hadn't quite understood the full extent of this. We're particularly reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing.
This election blew away the argument for a second referendum.
I urge everyone to find closure. Let the healing begin.
I'm sorry. We will miss you.
A process which I cannot describe as a dog's Brexit.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And Laura in the same studio, still 2 metres apart.
And Chris back in his socially distanced lair of news, just down the corridor.
And quite a lot further down that corridor and many more, it's Katya in Brussels.
And maybe a little bit further away after tonight because Belgium's just tightened up their travel restrictions for British people. So we will be visiting for a while. Sorry. But at least we're having this virtual visit.
Yes.
Now, I was a bit worried that we might not have enough to say about Brexit. So I've invited in some soon-to-be friends of the podcast. Well, let's see how this goes by the end. We've got David Gauke, former Justice Secretary in the Theresa May government and a big figure in the Brexit saga. Hello, David.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Very pleased that you could join us. And we've also got Paul Stevenson, a former government advisor who was also one of the top bods in the Vote Leave campaign. Hello, Paul.
Hiya.
I thought well, no, thanks for coming on. I thought we could start in a reflective mood. Does everyone have just one kind of key moment from the last 5 years that you just think that's the moment I'll tell when I go on This Is Your Life in like 27 years or 30 years time? Laura?
Do they still make This Is Your Life?
Maybe it'll come back.
I love that. Okay, so mine was actually walking down, you'll know, what's the name of the big street in Brussels where you've got the Summit building on the right and you cut the big...
Rue de la Loi.
Right, walking up Rue de la Loi, and actually my phone pinged and it had all seemed really terrible. We were at some summit, it all seemed like it was going to be a disaster. Boris Johnson was already in charge and my phone pinged and it said, deal done. And that for me was kind of... And it was weird because I was on my own.
And that was the withdrawal agreement?
Yes.
The divorce deal. Katya, what was your standout moment?
It's too many because, you know, my catchphrase used to be, and just one more thing.
Yes.
I think in the last 5 years, there are so many things. I think for me, a lot of it is what's been unexpected in the last 5 years. Again, it's so many things, but from an EU perspective and as an EU watcher, I think it has been interesting to see the EU keep its unity vis-à-vis the United Kingdom. That's quite unexpected. As we're speaking right now, on Thursday evening, the EU leaders are squabbling away over all sorts of subjects at a summit just down the road from where I am, and that is their normal state of play. So I think that was quite interesting how well they stuck together. And the fact that I think, Laura, the fact that we did get a deal and a broader deal than the narrow one that we were told to expect. And unfortunately, the problems over the Northern Ireland Protocol, I can't say were unexpected.
David, do you have a moment that you just will be the front page of your autobiography?
I'm not sure there'll be an autobiography, and I'm not sure it'll be on the front page. But I'll tell you one moment I particularly recall, which was I just got out of prison.
That's a great opening line.
To be clear, I was Justice Secretary at the time, and I'd visited Brixton Prison, and I was back in the ministerial car driving back to the office, and it was the Monday after Chequers, and turned on the radio, and Boris Johnson had resigned. And that was a moment, I think, when having David Davis already having resigned, where just realised how difficult it was going to be to find a deal that most of the Conservative Party was going to be satisfied with, that was, in my view, sort of sensible and responsible and left us with a good relationship with the EU. And the kind of collapse of Chequers on that day, I think, was a big important moment. And although she was able to stagger on for some time yet, I think at that point the Theresa May's project was probably doomed.
And Chris, what about you? Because I remember at that moment, you and me were together outside the then Foreign Secretary's residence. And I remember you were on the telly and I was on the phone or doing something. And then
I was on holiday, obviously.
And I remember running around, going, oh, he's gone. Which actually we knew was going to happen. But in the moment, obviously, we all started running around like headless chickens. But what would be your moment?
So I remember that moment that David reflects on, and I remember interrupting you, Laura, because I think you were in the middle of recording a documentary.
I was, yeah.
And I was on the BBC News channel. It was a couple of weeks in the middle of summer, those rare weeks when as a bloke, as a political correspondent, you can broadcast without your jacket on. I just remember that. And I remember charging across in one of those slightly ludicrous, in fact, completely ludicrous moments of just interrupting you as you were recording a reflective thought for a documentary that would go out several months down the track, saying, it's happened, it's happened, and waving my phone around. Yeah. And then you said, right, I'm going on the telly, and you swapped cameras and dived on. But no, the moment I recall, the moment that really sticks in my memory from the last 5 years was the day of the result of the referendum, the morning after, because I was sent to Boris Johnson's house. And there's a huge media scrum outside the house waiting for him to leave the house in Islington in North London to sort of remain central. And I just remember this moment of this bloke, very well-dressed bloke in his 50s. I mean, I've no idea who he was or where he was going, but he looked like he might be pedalling off to a quite senior job in the city or something. And he shouted out, I mean, the most colourful four-letter word in the English language you can possibly imagine, in the direction of one of his fellow Islingtonians at the time, Mr. Johnson.
Now,
and
Paul,
granted, it was Remain Central, but you did think, oh yeah, this is going to be a sparky few years after this.
Now, Paul, I'm going to be quite mean to you because I imagine your standout moment, having helped to run Vote Leave, was winning the referendum that changed the entire course of British history. But that press conference on the day after the referendum where Boris Johnson and Michael Gove were in Vote Leave HQ, they both looked very sombre. Some people even said, oh, they look like they didn't even want to win or didn't expect to win, and they've now inherited this massive problem. At that point, did you have a plan for what Vote Leave was going to do after that and contribute to the process? And did that plan end up happening, or did you end up having to do something different as a kind of organisation and as a group of people?
So Vote Leave had a plan for Brexit and a plan for how it would approach the negotiations. But Dom Cummings had been very, very keen that people weren't thinking about anything apart from winning. So he just always said, we focus on getting as many votes as possible over the line before 10 p.m. on the 23rd of June. So actually, we didn't have a plan for the press conference the next day, or not a well-developed one, which we started, to scrabble around and get ready for the next morning. And I think actually, in many ways, I mean, not everyone would agree with me on the Leave campaign, but I think in many ways that was a big mistake, and actually was almost the beginning of the next chapter, where if the Leave campaign had in many ways overperformed in the referendum and won against expectations, we then were on the kind of set off a sort of losing streak where Brexit there were attempts to dilute or maybe overturn Brexit, and I think that was the beginning of an opening of a sorry chapter for the Leave side.
So you won the war and then set about losing lots of battles.
Well, yeah, quite right. Theresa May came into Downing Street, and all my team who just worked their guts out on this referendum and won this stunning victory. Suddenly, we were all sat at home, unemployed and a little bit depressed. It was a very bittersweet moment.
Well, because that was the weird thing about the whole process, because we had all that drama, and then you had the drama of the Tory leadership contest. But Brexit as a thing didn't really become an issue, I think, maybe, David, until the Tory party conference in October 2019, where on the Sunday, in a very rare Sunday speech from a Conservative Prime Minister, Theresa May said, leaving the single market, leaving the customs union, no ECJ. And from talking to lots of your former colleagues and reading what they said, for them, that's the bit where it's like, oh, wow, this is what Brexit's going to be like now.
Yeah, in 2016, yes, that's right.
Oh, sorry, I said 2019. Sorry, what year are we in? 2016.
We've got quite scrambled in the last 5 years. But
yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure there was some Brexit going on between 2016 and 2019, but there we go. Now, yeah, you're right. And I mean, as a cabinet, we'd had one conversation, I think, proper conversation about Brexit in the whole of that period. So we had a meeting. Yeah, we had a meeting of the full cabinet. We had a meeting in. I mean, remember she became Prime Minister pretty late before the summer recess. then we all disappeared in August. At the end of August, we had a cabinet meeting in Chequers, not the Chequers cabinet meeting, but we had a cabinet meeting in Chequers where we talked about Brexit, but it was very high level. And then the next thing, we had the party conference speech. So the cabinet hadn't really engaged very much on this at that point. And curiously, for this period, I was in the cabinet, but not with a Brexit role. It wasn't one of those particular places where I was focused. And the cabinet didn't really have very much to, as a whole, didn't have very much to do with Brexit until the Chequers meeting in 2018. But yeah, you're right. The story picked up in the party conference, and at that point, Theresa May had started to make some choices and started to go in a particular direction, and you know, that's when I think for some people came as a bit of a shock.
I think what came as a shock for the EU was not only the result of the referendum for many of the EU leaders, but also they assumed that there was then a clear Brexit plan, and they were really quite thrown at the fact that it seemed that Parliament over and over again and members of the government knew what they didn't want, but it didn't seem clear at all what they did want, which brings me to one of the things that sticks out in my mind, which was a terrible rendition of Tell Me What You Want, What You Really, Really Want, sung to me by a commissioner, which was quite distressing. But obviously it was serious. You know, what kind of Brexit is there going to be negotiated between the two sides? And I think that made those negotiations really fraught, and the rancour around some of those negotiations. The Northern Ireland issue, actually, during the negotiations, both sides worked so hard together to try and get that right. But it doesn't take much, as we see now, when you're actually trying to implement the Northern Ireland Protocol, for that sort of bitterness, resentment, rancour and mistrust to surface again. I
just remember during that period in Brussels, it being so confusing what was actually happening in the UK at key points. And I just remember the famous Brady Amendment, where does anyone remember that? It all seems like gobbledygook now when you think about it.
The Malthouse Compromise.
Exactly. And I remember just particularly with the Brady Amendment, which was a minor piece of parliamentary theatre around Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, about Northern Ireland and the UK-wide backstop as it was then, and just not understanding it and just being so frustrated and banging my head on the table with frustration about, I don't understand this. And then somebody quite senior in the UK government saying, you don't need to understand it. It was just to get us through the next couple of weeks and to prove there was something that the Conservative Party, enough people could agree on just to keep the show on the road. And so Brexit made me, and being in Brussels made me, a much more kind of methodical, rational person. And actually, it wasn't always a rational, methodical process.
Well, it was it was a time of huge rancour, huge irritation, a huge split from top to toe in the Tory party.
Paul, I've just been having a look at the New Statesman magazine this weekend, which, like so many like us, are reflecting on 5 years on. And in fact, there's a contribution from David in there, which we might come to later. But Matthew Elliott, one of your colleagues from Vote Leave, he talks about Brexiteers were fortunate that Labour and other Remainer supporters didn't back what he describes as Brexit in name only. Otherwise, he said, you could have had a split Conservative Party, Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister, and his argument is that Keir Starmer has made his own look in terms of where he is now as a former shadow Brexit secretary. How worried were you at those moments that this thing you had campaigned for so passionately could just slip away entirely?
Very worried. And there was this huge pressure in Parliament for all Tory MPs to back meaningful votes 2 and 3. And actually, you know, the Spartans, as they called themselves, held out. And people were worried about the Tory party falling apart, worried about the government losing to Labour and all that stuff. But actually, that resistance, which then led to her resigning and the leadership campaign, as I say, that was the pivotal moment, because then actually you could see a path through, and it was very, very clear, you know, if there was going to be a leadership campaign, that you know, the harder Eurosceptic candidates were going to win with the party. I mean, that was absolutely clear. But yeah, it was a very unnerving time for the whole country, because we seemed directionless in many ways, because the Parliament couldn't agree, and actually that then went right through to the election campaign, and that was the most powerful message at all for the Tories, which was, let's just end this madness and let's just get it done. And that's really where the country was.
And then we had the withdrawal agreement signed. We had what Barnier calls the political Brexit, where we went into the transition period, which then got extended and extended. And then we had what then Barnier calls the economic Brexit in January 2020. I'm now second guessing every year that I say on this programme. But then that's maybe how the country feels. So actually maybe that's okay. And of course you had like the big projection on Downing Street and the countdown to 11 p.m. because of course it was midnight Brussels time. My main memory of that night was I had a fever and a persistent cough and was feeling quite tired from a virus that didn't have a name at that point. But we'll move on. We'll move on from that. But it's weird that those two things are now completely connected in my mind. And then David, we had to start living with the consequences of Brexit. Have you identified any kind of genuine consequences that you predicted might happen that have happened? And what are they and what's the effect been?
Well, I think to a large extent, disentangling what is a COVID effect and what is a Brexit effect is quite hard.
I'm a giant metaphor. Love it.
Yeah, no, well, it's very helpful, Adam. So I think what Brexit has done is probably accelerated what may have happened anyway. But I think it has fundamentally shifted our politics. I think there is a political realignment that has gone on. The Conservative Party has been able to appeal to, if you like, working class voters to a much greater extent. We've seen the fall of the Red Wall, and our divide in politics, similar to what has happened in other places like the US, is less on economic grounds. It's perhaps more on education, if you like. It's on cultural values. And as a consequence, the Conservatives have made advances in some areas, but I suspect, and this will play out over a longer period of time, I suspect maybe in retreat in other areas. And I think there are a group of people, and I am one of them, that essentially is still economically and fiscally on the centre or centre-right, but really doesn't like where the Conservative Party has gone on some of these, on Brexit and perhaps on other wider cultural issues. And I think there's a sort of group of people that are now politically homeless. I don't think the other parties are particularly effective in picking up those of us in that category. But I think there's a more fundamental shift in our British politics that's going on. And I think Brexit has probably more accelerated it rather than created it.
To be clear,
one of the things that's quite interesting is, obviously, and I remember speaking to you, Laura, about this during the campaign. We were saying, is the Tory party ever going to be able to get back together again? When you had senior members of the party attacking each other day in, day out over Europe, and it just confirmed what everyone, long held view in Westminster, that the Tory party was split top to bottom on the issue of Europe. Actually, that now isn't true. And it's the Labour Party that has the real problem with Europe. And it's arguably holding back Starmer now because of his position from before, as Matthew argued in that article. But I think it will hurt them at the next election because, if you look at the way the treaty is designed, there's big moments that come just after the next election, right? This 5-year review clause and so on. And I don't know this, but I would guess that the Prime Minister would want to go into the next election and say, can you trust Starmer in these big negotiations with Europe when we think about our future relationship? So I think it'd be quite, and they've got a difficult balancing act with the different parts of their electoral coalition.
Heard it here first. But Paul, you said the Tory party isn't split on it anymore, but you've just heard, David and others saying, well, it doesn't really feel like their party anymore.
Yeah, because you chuck them out, not because of some amazing uniting genius superpower. It's chuck it out the opponents.
I think if you look at generally the Parliamentary Party now,
the people who got selected in 1919 when they...
There isn't a big divide on Europe anymore.
I have a question for all of you learned friends, which is, we've spoken about the unity of the Tory party in the wake of Brexit. What about the unity of the United Kingdom? Would you have expected the strains that there have been on Northern Ireland and Scotland following Brexit?
I think Northern Ireland and Scotland were two big parts of the campaign. That was discussed a lot during the campaign. I think clearly Northern Ireland and the rules and regulations that need to be put in place around free movement of goods and so on was going to be a complicated issue that would need to be worked through in the negotiations. I do think it was also used quite badly by the EU at parts of the negotiations, and I think the backstop was a way to get the UK into a position that I think would have been really, really quite damaging for the UK. But look, I think over the next few months and years, there's going to be friction between the UK and the EU on all sorts of trading issues. The future of green policy, subsidy regimes, and all this kind of stuff. And Northern Ireland will continue to be an area where there'll need to be lots of careful work in order to get it to the right place. But my sense is that there will be a way through found on issues around sausages and so on. But it might need the EU to back down a little bit on some of its kind of approach.
On sausages, you'll like to know the German phrase for the fact that there is a new extension, which is Wurstelstillstand, which is a German play on words, humour.
Sausage standstill.
So Waffenstillstand is a ceasefire in a war. So a Wurstelstillstand is a ceasefire over sausages. But my question was more about
they've avoided the worst.
Intra-UK strains. The potential of another referendum in Scotland, the SNP sounding very confident. These are strains within the United Kingdom after Brexit.
Yeah, David, does the UK's departure from the EU lead to Scotland and Northern Ireland's departure from the UK? And give us like a considered answer, not like a scary Ramona answer.
Well, of course, I'd give you a considered answer.
Of course.
I thought
Adam.
for a second you were going to say, of course I'll give you a scary Ramona answer, but that would be very rude of me to say that.
The answer is it puts it under strain. I don't think anything is inevitable. I very much hope that we don't see the breakup of the UK, but of course it puts it under strain, and it was always going to put it under strain. And Scotland did vote a different way from the UK as a whole, and it's not surprising that the SNP have sought to take advantage from that, and it was entirely predictable. And coming back to Northern Ireland, and actually this is a sort of wider point of perhaps responding to some of the things Paul was saying earlier, a lot of the problems that we had after the referendum result in implementing Brexit is that a lot of pretty incompatible things have been promised. So, in Northern Ireland, no border between GB and NI, no border between NI and the Republic, and divergence from the UK and the EU. Now, how do you solve that problem? And so there's some of the trade-offs that necessarily have to be addressed when you try to implement Brexit made things terribly difficult. And with Northern Ireland, it has made things difficult, and it has meant that we have got, despite what the Prime Minister repeatedly said, we signed up to checks on trade going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, and how you solve that. I hope we can come up to some sensible solution to it. But the UK has agreed to a load of things that frankly make things more difficult.
Now, Katya, I was at the G7 summit in Cornwall. Well, kind of next to the G7 summit, if I'm honest. Laura was actually at it. But Ursula von der Leyen was there. Charles Michel was there. Boris Johnson had bilats, to use that terrible diplomatic phrase.
And even trilats, which is even worse.
Yeah,
it's like something you do in the gym.
Sounds exhausting.
I certainly don't do them. So we had bilats with Macron, Merkel, and the Prime Minister of Italy. And guess what? All the reporting we did about those bilats wasn't about climate change or China. It was about Northern Ireland and sausages. Are you surprised that we and you, Katya, are still having to talk about all this stuff still? Because I am a bit surprised that the UK-EU relationship is still all about these old things and not about new things.
So I think you have to look at it with different spectacles on. So if we look at this with UK spectacles, we're still talking about it because Brexit was a huge thing happening with our country. It still politically is a divisive issue in the United Kingdom. And, from the EU perspective, certainly they feel that, the government is out to prove we were right. The EU is still being difficult and, and Brexit is going to be a great success. Look, there are all of these opportunities. Here you go. On the EU side of things, if you look at the European Union media, media across they don't mention Brexit, they're not talking about the sausages in German newspapers on their front pages.
So we started off talking about momentous, meaningful moments, sort of Des O'Connor moments, or This Is Your Life. What are the absurd moments? Has anyone got a real classic moment of just like Brexit farce that they like to think about?
There are plenty of them. Well, there was this sort of Theresa May going off to a summit and then a phone call from Marlene Foster happening in the middle of the summit, and then she had to go home, and then she got on a plane the next morning at 4 a.m. or something.
Theresa
and
May
went
getting
back
locked in
out.
her car when she went to see Merkel.
Oh, yeah, and then us using that on the news, and then apparently Number 10 was very unhappy about that. Sadly.
It did happen.
A surreal moment for me, that a very, very late night drink with somebody involved in the process, and they said, look, this is basically what's going to happen. They got out a grey napkin in the restaurant and wrote down what they thought was going to happen. I've still got it in my office drawer, and it's exactly what did happen over the next few months.
Oh, which strategic genius was that? Don't reveal your sources.
As if I ever would. A lot of wine had been taken, but they got it completely right.
Paul, a ridiculous moment for you?
So many. I remember getting a phone call from BBC Newsnight when we had this weird moment when the Labour Leave campaign might have left Vote Leave and maybe joined Leave.eu, but they denied it to me. But then a press release went out from someone else saying that they had done, and I had Newsnight on the phone saying, are Labour Leave in Vote Leave, or are they Leave.eu? And I'm just sort of holding my head. What is going on?
Are Labour Leave leaving Vote Leave to go to Leave.eu? Actually, one of my crazy moments, I got off the tube and I had about 4 missed calls from you, and then I called you straight back and you said, Michael's going to run. It's like, what? And it was the morning of Boris Johnson's leadership election. And then, that was a history-making phone call.
Yeah, I couldn't get hold of you, but I got hold of another one of your colleagues, and they said, I'm in an important conference this morning. I can't really talk. I said, I think you do want to talk.
I was in the back of a taxi doing some menial chore, I think. David, a bizarre moment. Did you get locked in a loo with Michael Gove, or stuck in a lift with Boris Johnson, or...
Not that I'm going to report. I mean, there's a really long story about an occasion where after some of us had abstained in a parliamentary vote, and I'd attempted to resign and hadn't been able to do so. It was all very, for sort of slightly complicated reasons, because the chief whip said, well, I think you probably should resign. I said, I think I should probably resign, but if I do, I think others will do the same. There was a meeting of the various ministers who had abstained on this vote for reasons I won't go into. And they all said, well, if you resign, I'll resign. And it was a quite Spartacus moment. And I was saying, well, look, I think they just want a sort of limited explosion. They don't want sort of 16 of us resigning. If I just resign, you all stay on. And then everyone was insisting that they too would resign. And I tried to persuade them not to, and ended up with none of us resigning, at least.
But doesn't that sum up the difference actually between the Brexiteer side of the argument and the Remain side of the argument in the Tory party? Actually, or the softer Brexit by that point, is that you guys were all going, well, you resign, oh, well, let's not resign. And the other side are like, who can resign quickly enough because they'll look like the best candidate in the leadership election next time round.
It wasn't about putting pressure. It wasn't about putting pressure on Theresa. It was kind of...
When you and Amber Rudd and Greg Clark put an article in the Mail on Sunday saying you couldn't support our proposals, that wasn't putting pressure on?
That was another occasion. Well, this was the point, to be honest, Laura, where sort of some of us on the other side of the argument tried to be a bit more muscular.
But you hadn't done enough trilats in the gym. David and Paul, thank you very much for that high-speed amble down memory lane. Bye, everyone. Bye.
When will we next do a BREXITCAST? Goodbye for now.
See ya.
Bye.
BREXITCAST.
BREXITCAST.
From the BBC.